Hello everyone, welcome to this week's video, and in this week we are going to solve the challenge of form validations. There are a number of ways to do form validations. There is no best way that I have seen to do form validations, but we'll do something that's a good way or a better way in here, right? And we'll try to make this configurable so that if you build it for your company, your customer, or whoever it is, the form is configurable in such a way that you build it once, and then if you want to do any changes to the kind of form validations you do, those changes will be easier to do in the future. So let's go ahead with it. So here you see that there are most of the fields are required fields for us. So mark them as required over here. And we have two optional fields, that is address line 2 and a comment. And everything else is required. So one way to do form validation is, say, if you want the user to go from top to bottom, right? Um, it is in this style of form, then what you would want to do is, if the user does not start from the top, then you can start throwing errors for the ones that they did not fill in, right? So for example, if I wanted the user to start with my name but he's not starting with the name, then and starts with the date, then you can throw an error for the name field. Now, or if the user started with a comment which is optional and they did hello, then you can throw an error for that, right? So you can do those things. Now you do nil, and these errors still pop up because you already visited the comment field, right? So which means these fields are still empty. So that's one way to do form validations. The another way to do it um, is not to throw an error until and unless the user has clicked on the save or go next button, right? Or clicked on an action button basically. Now in that case as well, in terms of buttons also, we have multiple options available. So one of them is that the save button is has a conditional visibility on it, right? So it will become, or it will remain disabled until the form is completely filled in, right? So for example, if I go put in as main street and city as EDM, 12345, and pick one state as New York and step out, right? So what should happen? Oh, and I haven't agreed terms and conditions. So if I agree that, these two buttons become highlighted, right? Now, let's say if I uh, remove one of the required conditions. So if I uncheck the form, then the save buttons become disabled. Or if I remove the address line, the form is still not valid, right? So you can do those things. Now, um, that's one option to do it in terms of buttons, right? So in the first option, you have again three options. That's what the buttons were. So let's refresh the form and take a look at it again, right? So the first option is where the button always remains disabled, and if you click on it, there's nothing happens. The third option is where the save button is always active. So it checks if the form is valid, and then if it is valid, then it goes and does the next step, right? Or whatever action you want to take, it will take. But if I click on the save button, the form is not valid, so it will throw me all the errors, right? So now if I start filling the form, whatever order I go in, right? So say I started with the city, that's EDM. So the error goes away for city, but for everything else it remains. So say if I select zero, but it doesn't matter, right? These errors are sticking now because I've already clicked on the button. So that's the second option. The or that's the third option. The second option is the button seems disabled, but it's not disabled, right? So say I started filling in, I put in these things, and uh, or sorry, um, Main Street, city is ADM 12345, and say New York, right? And I think I've filled everything. And if we're using the option one, the user keeps clicking and nothing happens, right? So it's a bad experience because user thinks they've filled in all the options, but they've actually forgotten to click on the I agree to the terms and conditions. So we're not. letting the user know what the issue is. But in these two cases, option 2 and option 3, or in option 3 as we saw before, if the user clicks on the button, then they will see an error. But in terms of option 2, which is a sweet spot between option 1 and option 3, is the button seems to be disabled, and if the user tries to click on it, it will say, oh, this was the error. So if we click on it, the button becomes enabled. So that's one. Now, say the user had, for option 2, the user had forgotten many more fields, right? And the user thought they had filled in everything, and uh, right, 1 2 3 4 5, and they think that, oh, they filled everything, so they hit save and they see two errors. Now because the user has already clicked on this option, we should keep showing all the errors until they have filled in, or they have finished, or the form is valid, right? So doesn't mean that if they go and select the state, the last error goes away. No. So if there are 5 errors in the form, then they should be sticky. So that's, and they click on the agree button, it does, right? So these are the three options for the save buttons. Now, say as we were discussing in the start of this video, is, say for example, if I have the, if I want the user to select or go in the top down approach, and if they start with the middle field or last field or whatever it is, then we show the errors that's on top of those fields, right? So the sequence basically, so 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 and 10, right? So we have 10 sequences. Now how do we, so basically if someone clicked on the second field, then we need to make sure that the first field is valid. If someone clicked on the fifth field, then or they not click but they put in a value or change the value for the fifth field, then we need to check that if the first four are valid or not, right? So so say this is 7 8 9 10, so say this is sixth field and they put in EDM, and we are checking the first one, two, three, four, five fields, right? Because this is a six field. So when we're checking, we're checking that, okay, so this field is required but it's not filled in, or not a valid value, right? This is filled in, this is filled in, this is not filled in, this is optional, so it's okay, and so so on, right? Now say we put in a wrong value for zip code 56, it shows that error as well, right? Now say um, we go and put in comment is optional, right? So if we say hello, but the error for state comes up, and zip code and address line 1 and name are still sticking, right? So now say you have a, you don't mind user going and filling the form in any order, right? And you just want them to have a valid form, right? And you don't want to show basically the values that are for an empty field, right? And you want to show, so in this particular case, for example, until the user clicked on one of the three buttons, you wanted them, or the option 2 and option 3, you just wanted to show one error, that is zip code, because it is an invalid value, then you can do that as well. So the, and the reason I said I had kept it configurable is because if you go to my Studio Pro, I have constants for multiple things, right? So one of them is error on empty. So because I have set it to true, it will show errors for empty fields as well. But if I set it to false, and because it's a constant value, I just need to rerun the project. But once the project is done rerunning, um, you will observe that in this particular condition situation, you will not see errors for the empty fields. So let's wait until this has finished running, and once it is done, we should be almost done here. Okay, so we're done. Let's go and take a look at this again. So now say I started with the date field, and there's no error for name field because it's empty, right? I started with city, that is EDM, there's no error for it. I came to hello, there is no error for the empty fields, right? So it makes the user comfortable enough to not see everything red on the screen, right? And only when they click, so this button is disabled, right? So there's nothing you can do on it. But the second option where the button looks disabled, but if the user clicks on it, the errors come up. Now these errors will stick because user has clicked on the save button. So, so if I click this one, those the other ones still stick. You select California, zip code still sticks there. You say do 156, it's the wrong one. So, or let's keep it as it for now. Main Street, that goes away. If you go to Neil, that goes away, right? So these buttons still seem disabled because the zip code is wrong. Do 12345, it comes up, both are lit up. So so that's that, right? Now, but we are not showing those errors. So again, let's do Neil. Uh, this is hello, right? Put in a date and remove Neil, whatever it is, right? And let's do 12345 6, and zip code error shows up even though we have not clicked on any of the buttons, right? And change this value to high, so our validation should kick in. And if you click on this one still shows up because it's a wrong value, not an empty value. So there's a difference, right? Empty value is not wrong value. So that's why. So that's what it is uh, about the form validations. And if you do Main Street, city EDM 5, and do New York, done, agree to terms and conditions, and everything is fine, right? You can click on any of the three buttons, say the first one because it became enabled and we had never clicked on it. Click on it, you say form submitted successfully, you get it, you get here, right? So how have I built this form validation? One way I've built it is, or the way I have built it is, um, setting up the 10 different fields over here as 10 different and or 10 different values or in another field, right? So basically what I've done on my end is if you go to domain model, this is the form that we see. So name, date of birth, and all those things, right? User agree to terms and conditions or not, is save button clicked or not, right? Is the form valid or not? The highest visited means um, the number of, or the current field that the user has visited. So basically the sequence number is the highest field visited, right? So if you visited if you started with agree terms and conditions first, then it knows that it needs to, even though you are filling the second field, it needs to keep doing a validation for all the fields here, all the 10 fields. Or say if you fill the eighth field first, right, you can still keep doing validation for all of these. So that's what it is. The reason I do that is it helps in form validation in the first case where we want to show errors on empty as well, or when error on empty is set to true. So that's when I use it for. So the main helper entity I have is this one, right? So you put in the sequence number, so and then the field name is required or not, minimum length, maximum length, and the characters that are not allowed, right? So the example of this one is here, right? um this is just a visual format of how I wanted to show you guys on how I have done it. So the name field, date of birth field, urgent processing, and list of 10 fields that I have in my form, um, if they are required or not, right? What's the minimum length of the string that's allowed? What's the maximum length allowed? So if you saw the validation error for zip code, that it allows only 5 characters, right? So you see the validation error when you put more than 5 characters. The minimum length is also here, so that error would also kick in. I have not put any banned characters here. So for example, uh, you could say that name shouldn't accept um, stars or dashes, right? Or exclamation mark and all those things. So you could put those things as a part of your form validation as well. But this list should never be bigger than or smaller than the fields you have on the page in the form here, right? So if you have 10 fields in the form, you should make sure that you have only 10 fields in your helper and not more than that. um, so that's with the helper entity. um, this is again the form is valid or is form valid helps you set the visibility of the buttons on page. So this is my page where the whole thing is a form, right? um, Name, date of birth, urgent processing, this, right? 10 fields, and then these are the three buttons that I wanted to show. But if you look at the visibility conditions, the first save button is if the form is valid or not, we show this button. If the form is invalid, we show the disable button, right? So we show that the button is disabled and there is no on click event on it. If the button is enabled, we show that there is a, we call a microflow basically, right? Same goes for these two as well, but on this one we call it on we call the microflow for validation or form submission on disabled as well, but we just manage the how uh, the buttons look, right? So this one has a default styling and this one has a successful styling, or button style is success, right? Which means it shows up as green on the page. And this one is always active button, there's no visibility conditions on it, right? So that's how I manage the to show the buttons on the page, and one single attribute handling all those things. Now how do I do the whole form validation? So the way I do my form validation is, for all the fields I have on change event, right? So say for name I have on change event is name. So if I show you, it's a single thing where I go and change the form's highest visited if is one, right? So if the form has a higher visited number, so if you started say with the eighth field, right, and then you come to the name field which is one, which has a sequence number of one, then we check here that if the highest visited is empty or less than the current value. So for one it will never be less than one, so we can ignore the condition here. But say if you were to go to something that is the fourth field, right, and go to on change for this one. So now we check over here that that if the highest visited is empty or it is less than 4, which is um, because the form, or sorry, not the form, but the address line 1 is the fourth field or sequence number 4 on our form. So if it is equals to empty or less than 4, then we should add the highest, change the highest visited to 4. Otherwise we leave what it is. So if you came from the ninth field, so the first field that you filled on the form is the ninth field, right, and then you come to the fourth field, then it will remain 9. But the the highest field you fill on the form is number 2, and then you come to the fourth field, then it will remain as 4. Or the fourth field is the first one you're filling in when you come land on the page, then again it will show as 4. So I do that, and then once I do that, have a whole form validation flow which validates all the fields, and or which checks if all the fields are valid or not, right? And I pass in the form entity over here. So if you go to this particular flow, let me make it a bit smaller. It's too small, but 150 is good. Okay, so if you see here, it accepts the current sequence and the form number, right? So uh, I used to use current sequence. Okay, it is being used in multiple places, so I'm not going to, yes, touch it, right, because it comes from here. So the current sequence is 4. So basically it means what is the current field that the user is on, right? So we do that. Now this is the whole flow where we first check if the name is valid or not. So name validation has its own flow where we go, zoom out, where we go and fetch the form helper for name. So it will give us this particular object. Form helper for name is this one, right? And then we check if the field is required or not, we check if it is empty or not, and we check if it is the max length that's allowed or not, right? And although, or if it has a max length available or not, right? If it is available, then we take that into consideration and do all those things. And then we don't show the validation error over here, but we pass the message back to the previous, or to the calling microflow. That is the act underscore form validation. And what do we pass here? So we have a constant which stores the message with what we want to write. So again, if you want to show error messages, then you don't have to worry about uh, doing multiple other things, or going and someone doing the code change on your end, right? You can change the constant and do it. You could also set this up in your form helper over here to show, say, validation error for empty, validation error for minimum length, validation error for maximum length, right? um, and all those things, right? So, and then you can configure it with the other things on the page. So there are multiple ways to do it, right? um, and then so we're here, and in this case we're just sending a string, we're not doing it through the constant. So we say please input a name with length less than or equal to maximum length, will take it from the attribute, and then space characters. So that's one example for name. We do that similarly, and then, oh, sorry, we check if the validation came empty or not, right? Because if you look here, if everything passes, if the string is valid, then if the name was a valid name, then we send in an empty string, right? We do that for all the other flows as well. So we check if the name is valid or not. So if it's empty, then it's valid, but if it's not valid, then it goes down. And then we again do multiple other calculations. So say we check if the save button was clicked or not, because we want our errors to be sticky, right? So we check, so as soon as someone clicks on the save button, we save that thing in our form, right? So we save it in our form saying save button was clicked. So now every error has to be sticky until the whole form is valid. So, and then, or we also check if we want to show errors on empty or not. And then um, and if those two are true, right, one of them is true, then we go down in the flow, which is this flow next decision. Otherwise we just go ahead without showing any validation error. And if both of these are false, right, then what we do is we go down and check if validate name is empty or not, right? So if you don't want to, or the error that came up is, did it come up for empty name or not? If it came up for empty name, right, then we don't show it. Otherwise we show it, right? So we go down and we check if we have to show errors or not, right? So to show error or not, we see if the save button was clicked or not, and then what is the highest sequence, right? What is the highest visited and what is the current sequence again? So if you are on the fifth field, right, and the highest visited is also, or if highest visited, or sorry, if you're on the fifth field, right, and highest visited is number 6, and if you are on number 5, right, then you show the error or not, basically, right? If you go here, that highest visited will change to 2, sequence greater than equal to comparison will also change to number 2, and so on and so forth. You keep going forward, right? And again here as well, it's the same. Here it will be the same thing. The only thing will be you check different error messages. So once your form, if you once you go through all the 10 fields to check if they're valid or not. And what you also do is in the start you have a variable set to true, which is form valid or not. And as soon as you find um, an error condition, or an uh, validation error, right, which means name was not right, goes down, and on any flow, right, it has to come here. So we said that is form valid to false. Now there is nowhere else where it goes back to true, so only in the start. So if everything went through this flow on top, right, kept going this way, um, like in this straight until the end, until we reached over here at this point, right? It all came through the top. Then it means the is form valid variable is true because it never went down in any of the invalid flow, which mean, and then what we do, or if it went down in one any one of them, it will become false, right? Because of these things. So, and after this merge, we set that value to be the is form valid for the form object. So form objects is form valid will be set by this particular variable. And what that does is, now this is form valid attribute for the form is what handles the visibility of our save buttons on the page, right? So that's how it is. And if again it goes down, if it comes uh, at this particular point, it will show. So this one throws an error for agree terms and conditions, this one throws error for the comment, right? This one throws error for the state. And what is the error? The error that comes from, what error do you throw? The error that comes from the from one of the validation flows. So if you go here, the validation flow, if there's an error, it throws from here. There's an error, right? So that's how it is. It's a pretty simple one. I will be committing all the smaller changes that I have done to this branch, and this branch will become accessible to you guys uh, whenever you want. So if you want access to it, send me a message on LinkedIn, and I will give you access to these files, or I'll link a form below in the comments, so you can go ahead and fill the form and ask me for requests to the form as well. So I hope you like this video, and I hope this thing is helpful to you guys. Thank you so much for liking all my videos until now, and hope this one is helpful again. And I'll be coming out with new videos next week as well. I'm trying to make one video a week. It's getting difficult to make one video a week because I have to create content for it, record the video, edit the video, and all those things. But I'm still trying my best. Sometimes it's 2 weeks, or sometimes it's 10 days. But let's see. But yeah, thank you so much, guys, for the love and appreciation that you're showing me, and also thank you for all the messages you send me on LinkedIn and all the emails you send me. So thank you. Bye, guys.